Ben Shapiro just walked into Congress and completely dismantled the left's agenda in under 5 minutes.
It's an honor to testify before you here today. The reason that I'm with you is that I speak on dozens of college campuses every year, so I have some firsthand experience with the anti-First Amendment activities that have been taking place on the college campuses. I've encountered anti-free speech measures, administrative cowardice, even physical violence at campuses ranging from California State University at Los Angeles to University of Wisconsin at Madison, which is driving the legislation that Ms. Demings was talking about, to Penn State University to UC Berkeley, and I am not alone. In order to understand what's been going on at some of our college campuses, it's necessary to explore the ideology that provides the impetus for a lot of the protesters who violently obstruct events, pull fire alarms, assault professors and even other students, and the impetus for administrators who all too often humor these protesters. Free speech is under assault because of a three-step argument made by the advocates and justifiers of violence. The first step is they say that the validity or invalidity of an argument can be judged solely by the ethnic, sexual, racial, or cultural identity of the person making the argument. The second step is that they claim those who say otherwise are engaging in what they call verbal violence. And the final step is they conclude that physical violence is sometimes justified in order to stop such verbal violence. So let's examine each of these three steps in turn. First, the philosophy of intersectionality. This philosophy now dominates college campuses as well as a large segment, unfortunately, of today's Democratic Party, and suggests that straight white Americans are inherently the beneficiaries of white privilege and therefore cannot speak on certain policies, since they have not experienced what it's like to be black or Hispanic or gay or transgender or a woman. This philosophy ranks the value of a view not based on the logic or merit of the view, but on the level of victimization in American society experienced by the person espousing the view. Therefore, if you're an LGBT black woman, your view of American society is automatically more valuable than that of a straight white male. The next step in the logic is obvious. If a straight white male, or anybody else who ranks lower on the victimhood scale, says something contrary to the viewpoint of the higher-ranking intersectionality identity, that person has engaged in a microaggression. As NYU social psychologist Jonathan Haidt writes, microaggressions are small actions or word choices that seem on their face to have no malicious intent, but that are thought of as a kind of violence nonetheless. You don't have to actively say anything insulting to microaggress. Somebody merely needs to take offense. If, for example, you say that society ought to be colorblind, you're microaggressing certain identity groups who have been victimized by a non-colorblind society. Note, microaggressions, as the name suggests, are not merely insults. They are aggressions. They are the equivalent to physical violence. Just 2 weeks ago, psychologist Lisa Feldman Barrett of Northeastern University published an essay in the New York Times suggesting that words should be seen as physical violence because they can cause stress, and stress causes physical harm. Thus, Feldman suggested it is reasonable, scientifically speaking, to ban or restrict speech you do not like at your school. This is both inane and dangerous. That's because it leads to the final logical step. Words you don't like deserve to be fought physically. When I spoke at California State University at LA, one professor threatened students who sponsored me by offering to fight them. He then posted a slogan on the door of his office stating, "The best response to microaggression is macroaggression." As Haidt writes, this is why the idea that speech is violence is so dangerous. It tells the members of a generation already beset by anxiety and depression that the world is a far more violent and threatening place than it really is. It tells them that words, ideas, speakers can literally kill them. Even worse, at a time of rapidly rising political polarization in the United States, it helps a small subset of that generation justify political violence. Indeed, protesters all too often engage in physically violent disruption when they believe their identity group is under verbal attack by someone, usually conservative, but not always. Not only do some administrators look the other way, at Middlebury College, Cal State LA, Berkeley, Evergreen, actual crimes were committed and almost nobody has been arrested. But they actively forbid events from moving forward, creating a heckler's veto. The notion that if you are physically violent enough, you can get administrators to kowtow to you, to bow before you, by canceling an event you disagree with altogether. All of this destroys free speech. But just as importantly, it turns students into snowflakes, craven and pathetic, looking for an excuse to be offended so they can earn points in the intersectionality Olympics and then use those points as a club with which to beat opponents. A healthy nation requires an emotionally and intellectually vigorous population ready to engage in open debate at all times. Shielding college students from opposing viewpoints makes them simultaneously weaker and more dangerous. We must fight that process at every step. And that begins by acknowledging that whatever we think about America and where we stand, we must agree on this fundamental principle. All of our views should be judged on their merits, not on the color or sex or sexual orientation of the speaker, and those views should never be banned on the grounds that they offend someone. Thanks so much.
Mr. Shapiro, would the professors you cited in your testimony view your 4-minute and 48-second opening statement as a microaggression?
I assume that some of them would. I mean, apparently college students do all the time, since when I speak there, there have been riots and such.
I think they definitely will, which is kind of a sign of the times, I guess.
He rendered the whole room speechless. Ben Shapiro's congressional testimony hit like a wrecking ball because he wasn't talking in vague political slogans. He was talking from experience. He laid out exactly what conservatives have been warning about for years. America's universities stopped being places for open debate and started becoming ideological training camps where disagreement itself is treated like a crime. And what made this speech so effective is that Shapiro didn't just complain about cancel culture in general terms. He broke down the entire mindset behind it step by step. He explained how modern campus activism moved away from judging ideas on logic or evidence and instead started judging arguments based on identity. Not whether something is true, not whether it makes sense, but who is saying it. That's the core of what frustrated so many Americans watching this hearing. Conservatives have spent years being told that their opinions automatically matter less because of their race, gender, religion, or political beliefs. Shapiro went directly at that system and exposed how destructive it becomes once universities embrace it as official culture. Then he connected it to the rise of the idea that speech is violence. And that's where the entire conversation changes. Because once words are redefined as violence, suddenly actual violence becomes easier to justify. If somebody believes a conservative speaker is harming them simply by talking, then protesters start convincing themselves that shutting the event down physically is some kind of moral act. That's exactly what America watched happen across college campuses for years. Conservative speakers shouted down, events canceled, fire alarms pulled, students threatened, riots outside lecture halls, and the people supposedly running these universities often stood back and did nothing. In some cases, administrators practically rewarded the behavior by canceling speeches instead of defending free expression. Shapiro pointed out something else that many politicians avoid saying directly. These campuses were not producing stronger students. They were producing emotionally fragile activists trained to view disagreement as oppression. That line about turning students into snowflakes landed because millions of Americans had already seen it happening in real time. And remember the timing of this speech. This was during a period when campus protests and speech crackdowns were exploding nationwide. Schools like Berkeley became symbols of political intolerance despite claiming to stand for openness and diversity. The irony was impossible to miss. The institutions that constantly lectured America about tolerance suddenly had no tolerance for conservative opinions. What also made the hearing memorable was how calm and methodical Shapiro stayed while making arguments Democrats clearly did not want to engage with directly. He wasn't screaming. He wasn't ranting. He simply laid out the logical progression. Identity politics leads to labeling disagreement as aggression, which then leads to justifying censorship and intimidation. And honestly, that argument has aged remarkably well. Fast forward to today, and the debate over free speech is even bigger. Americans now see fights over censorship everywhere. Social media moderation, workplace speech rules, DEI bureaucracies, mandatory ideological training sessions, and public pressure campaigns designed to punish dissent. What started on college campuses spread into corporations, media, and government institutions. That's why this old testimony still circulates online years later. People look back at it and realize Shapiro was describing the early stages of a cultural shift that eventually exploded across the entire country. The most important point he made was also the simplest. A free society cannot survive if ideas are judged based on identity instead of merit. Once a nation abandons open debate and starts assigning moral authority according to victimhood status, political division gets worse, resentment grows, and violence becomes easier to rationalize. And that final exchange at the end said everything. When a congressman joked about whether professors would consider Shapiro's statement a microaggression, everybody already knew the answer. Of course they would. That was the entire problem he was describing. If colleges cannot handle a conservative speaker without chaos, intimidation, or accusations of violence, then those institutions are no longer defending education. They are defending ideology. And millions of Americans are finally waking up to it. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment below with your thoughts on campus free speech and whether universities have become too politically radicalized.